Think about this. 6 years, over 30 countries, and tens of millions of people lost. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. So the big question is, how do we possibly break down a 6-year global war in just a few minutes? Well, we're going to try. We'll hit the key moments, what kicked it all off, the big turning points, and how it completely reshaped the world we live in today.
And that really gets to the heart of it, right? How did one single conflict spiral so far out of control that it became the deadliest war in all of human history? I mean, how does that even happen? The answer, believe it or not, starts with just one single act of aggression that literally set the entire world on fire.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Let's look at that initial spark, the one that lit the fuse on this global firestorm.
So, the year is 1939, and you have to understand, Europe was basically a powder keg, just waiting to blow. There's all this leftover resentment from World War I, plus you've got this rising tide of fascist ambition. The final straw? That's when Adolf Hitler's Germany invades Poland. For a continent already on edge, that was it. Britain and France had no choice but to respond. They declared war. And just like that, what started as an invasion blew up into a full-on European conflict.
But here's the thing. A fire that big was never going to stay contained in Europe. It was only a matter of time before the entire globe got pulled in, with countries being forced to choose a side. This was quickly becoming a true world war.
And that's exactly what happened. Lines were drawn in the sand, and the world split into these two massive military coalitions. On one side, you had the Axis powers. They're the ones who really kicked this whole thing off. And on the other side, you had the Allied powers, a group that came together specifically to push back against that aggression.
So who are we talking about here? Well, the core of the Axis was a pact between Germany, Italy, and Japan. And facing off against them was this kind of unlikely team-up of Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and, in time, the United States. These were the major players in a war that was just getting bigger and bigger. And once you have these global superpowers in the mix, the battlefield is no longer just Europe. Not even close. The fighting spread like a virus across 3 different continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. This is what made it the first truly global war and, tragically, the deadliest conflict in all of human history.
Okay, so in any war this big, there are always these critical moments, right? Game changers that completely shift the momentum. So let's dive into the key turning points that really altered the course of World War II and decided who would win. So yeah, how did the tide turn? It really boils down to 3 huge events. First up, you've got the German invasion of France. It was just lightning fast. Their blitzkrieg tactic was terrifyingly effective, and it knocked a major Allied power out of the fight almost immediately. But then the Axis got a little too confident. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor? That woke a sleeping giant. It brought the full industrial and military power of the United States roaring into the war. And finally, over on the Eastern Front, you have the Battle of Stalingrad. This was just a brutal, grinding meat grinder of a battle. It became the graveyard for an entire German army, and it totally stopped the Nazi advance in its tracks. That was really the beginning of the end for Hitler in the East.
So with the momentum completely flipped, the path to an Allied victory was starting to look a lot clearer. But the end of the war, well, it was going to leave behind a legacy that would change the entire planet forever.
The final year, 1945, brought everything to a swift and incredibly brutal end. In May, after years of fighting, Germany finally surrendered in Europe. Victory in Europe. But the war in the Pacific was still raging. To try and force a conclusion, the United States unleashed a terrifying new kind of power on the world, dropping atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Faced with that level of unimaginable destruction, Japan surrendered that September. And just like that, after 6 long, devastating years, World War II was finally over.
And the silence that followed must have been deafening. The world was left to pick up the pieces. You had entire cities just gone, reduced to rubble. Economies were completely shattered, and the loss of life was on a scale so massive it's still hard to really wrap our minds around it today.
But, out of all that destruction, this powerful idea emerged. A global promise, really. Never again. To try and make sure a catastrophe like this could never, ever happen again, the world's nations came together and created the United Nations. Its whole mission, its entire reason for being, was to maintain peace and security around the globe.
So you see, the end of the war wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a whole new global era.
It basically hit the reset button on the world order and set the stage for, well, for the next 75-plus years of history, which leaves us with one final big question to think about. How much of the world we live in, right now, today, is still being shaped by the shadow of this one single monumental conflict?